name is Zabine Van Ness. I'm born in Germany. At the present time, I live in Seattle. I'm the curator and director for the Washington Baha'i History Museum. Innovation and invention is something that keeps me young and keeps me talking. I love being around 20, 30-year-olds because even though here I am, 73, and usually my peers are either retired at this stage, they're still barely in emails, and social media hasn't really occurred to them yet. But if you want, when the first tablets and smartphones came about, I jumped into it, and I had to find the 20, 30-year-olds to teach me how to move around in tablets and move around in smartphones because I knew I wanted to talk to the youth around the world. So I started to do my first webinars when the platforms barely, were still working. This was still very innovative, and we were still struggling with bandwidth still. Because here I had these youth in Nigeria, I had this youth in India, I had youth over in Nepal, and the bandwidth was such an issue. But I wanted to connect into a World Cafe scene, and I wanted to talk about how to bring about solutions for the future. As a Baha'i, I know my solutions for the future. I just want to hold a conversation. I'm tired of talking about problems because the world is not, everybody else worries about problems. My life should be spent on coming up with solutions. I was born in the middle of World War II Germany, 1942. So my life started with a bang. And I was born on the North Sea. And the first 3 years, obviously, I have very little memory of anything. But my early memories are being in a household where we at night had to flee into the cellar. Because eventually, by the time I woke up to what really has happened, is that my hometown was completely bombed out. So my upbringing was one of violence, but my start in life was really at the consequences of that war. So my youth was basically one of hunger. I would go out and play in houses next to our home that were bombed out, and we called it treasure hunting. We didn't have any idea, we just knew there was great stuff amongst all the rubble. And so we would come home with treasures, and my mom was just shocked at the things we would bring home and ask where we found them. Then we found another treasure somewhere. And we slowly but surely then became aware that as we grew older, we became aware what our environment was. Our tragedies were something like when a lot of us didn't have fathers at home, right? And so, but we always could tell when a father returned the night before, and the kids would be skipping in school, and we would be obviously very envious. I was lucky because my father was not in, and my stepfather was under Rommel in Africa, and my mother's brother was in Italy. But my father was in South Germany, so I didn't go through that. But the first question we very casually would ask, what's missing? And what we asked was an arm missing? Was a leg missing? Where was the coming out of the camps, right? So there was some very serious damage. And we would then discuss. So it was a youth that was unrealistic. It was looking back today, and I see the youth, how easy everything is. And yet, I didn't feel I was suffering when I was little. We just accepted it for what it was. So by the time I was 16, I realized that I really wanted to leave Germany because everything was so complicated. I was, as a young girl, I was somewhat in a blaming mood. Oh, Mom and how could you allow this? Why didn't you stand up and fight them, fight them single-handed, so to speak, even though There was never many signs during the war in my hometown. It wasn't until the end of the war, which is, when all that occurred. So there was a lot of blaming, and I was just a typical rebellious teenager. I felt I just needed to see the world. And with 16, then 17, I arrived within a week of that. I arrived in London, England. That was the first time I ever saw a big city, my hometown. 32,000, everybody's blonde, Vikings, right? So everybody was Lutheran. I mean, there was no variety. Though I remember once walking on the beach, and I guess occupation must have started because I was a little girl on the beach. My hair naturally is very curly, curly, curly. And it was an Afro-American girl, and I'd never seen an Afro-American girl in my hometown. So I ran over, and I remember playing with her hair. And I remember pointing at her hair to my mother. I said, look, she's just like me. There's another one with curly hair. And looking back on that experience, how we just didn't see the difference. To me, it was just about both of us having curly hair. And the rest, I didn't notice. So here I am, born in 42, and I've been around the world plenty of times. And I visited 65 countries. Out of those times, I also have 43,000 sea miles under my keel. That means sailing on open ocean. I crossed the Atlantic, and I crossed the English Channel. I'm not the kind of a person that fits what you call a profile, fits into a box. That minute I see that everybody is marching along to the same drummer, and therefore that change is not happening because of that, and that marching is going into a direction that to me was either not innovative, wasn't growth-oriented, or it wasn't bringing about a new world. My father was an inventor. He was the inventor of the baby car seat, as I mentioned. And he always said that it's good news, bad news. He says you inherited that inventiveness. And you can either put it to use to make money, which is what he did. You can put it to good use where you get yourself an advanced education, where you can then, through education, invent something. Or you become the kind of a person that watches what's going on around you, and then you come up with ideas because you feel that was something that didn't exist, and if only you could figure out how to put it together. So it's by the seat of your pants. You invent things because you felt there was a need. And so I came up with the idea that to have a gathering place, and the best gathering place for me was to start a museum. So I started a museum. It's a boutique museum. It's a small museum, right? It's a hands-on museum. But it really, instead of having objects behind cages and in glasses and hands-off, I felt what really I was about was very much a touchy-feeling, hands-on person and experience things not just on a touch screen, but physically experience it, that I wanted to have a place where we could hold the conversations around solutions for the future, where it was driven by the young people. Everything in here, it has a conversation that brings you back to an era where it was groundbreaking and it provided some happiness or enhanced your conversation. And then I want to bring you into the future. If you then have 20 years from now, what do you think will be your future? So I like to encourage and hear the conversations about where we came from, how revolutionary it was then, and think in 20, 30 years from now. What do you think this place would look like? What would you add to this place in 2030? And what do you think you would add in this place in 2050? And if so, what would be the solution that we don't have right now? You can have a lot of great supporting women around you. But if it's all about clothes and hairs and nails and having a bigger house, is that the value system that if you're within your peer group of those women, that in the end ultimately may still not be the value system, right? So you have to look at the value system of your society or your peer group that you're in. And we can pretend maybe that we're very spiritual or religiously, maybe even religiously fanatic, but ultimately we have to be balanced. So how do you establish the balance? And for me as a Baha'i, I go right to the writings. And then do the Baha'i writings in this case. And it kind of outlines some of the responsibilities there. It shares with me that as a mother, ultimately, I do have the final responsibility to make sure that my child is well educated. Not just educated, but well educated. I encourage it to go into a career where she contributes something to society, not to make a lot of money. Coming out of an era where really, myself, women were mothers and housekeepers, taking care of the family. This is a different era now. The difference between a man and a woman is really quite minimal, if you think of it. Yes, I personally believe that most families, especially a modern family, the man is still the primary financial provider, even though we see it coming, especially in Western culture, where women are very much of an equal contributor. But there's also in my opinion, the time is sort of coming where women are starting to step back and take another look. They are the primary educators of the children. And even though men have very much arisen to take a huge responsibility with the raising of the children, just taking my own children, they're just visiting me right now from Hawaii. And I've noticed that my son is just completely engaged with the raising of his daughter. Women today really feel that they are sort of pioneering into a world that they left behind, whether it come out of the Pacific or come out of Africa or they come out of Asia or not so much the Western culture like Australia or Europe and so on, but different cultures. The young women today, and thank God for social media, they see what everybody else is. They see on YouTube what everybody else is doing, and they want to be part of that. They want to be the solution. But we have to educate. When I say don't mean we, but we have, the community have to help to educate the women where they have a balance in that traditional family, because you don't want to be, as a woman, be so audacious that you leave your family standing, you leave your husband not feeling appreciated. I think the roles of men, to bring out a little bit of the tender side in them, that women do have a tendency to become emotionally attached to their self-worth. When we look at you, we see the way our fathers treated us. So when I reflect on my husband, if his body language, his choice of words for me, we do look at that. A man maybe not so much, but a woman really does want to be so respected and so appreciated by a man that is her mate. And so we might be a little bit more needy than maybe the male might be a little bit more needy. But I think the writings allow for a male to be more tender and to reach out to what I would call his feminine side, and not it to be losing his masculinity. Because if she becomes stronger, then he becomes stronger, right? So we're really both each other's mirrors, because if you reflect and look at me and I bring out the best in you, we're both gaining. I think the males still bring the shoulder to the relationship. I like to share with young people, to me, what is important is, how do you feel empowered when suddenly, let's say, the grid went down. I talk to our kids, do walls really work? These are conversations I like to hold with them. Do walls really work? Berlin Wall, Palestine Wall, Chinese Wall. Trump wall going up, make it bigger, make it higher, right? I mean, no matter what wall, do walls ever really work, right? And then what is the most powerful weapon for a young person? And the most powerful weapon, not all the guns you want to have or all the stuff. So then the most powerful weapon is your smartphone. Because that's where your peers are. This is where, as long as you can still communicate, you still have a working smartphone, no matter where you are, you can always find peace-minded, like-minded people that are honest, filled with integrity, filled with honesty. They care about each other, and they realize that when in order to survive it, we have to stick together. And if you don't have that spiritual balance, or it's just me, you're going to be very lonely.